everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie. Hello. And together we are ThinkerThemer, and we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. Today we're excited to be reviewing for you Atiwa by Uwe Rosenberg and publisher Lookout Games.
So in Atiwa, we find ourselves in the Atiwa region in Ghana, Africa, where we have been tasked with developing a community where we're going to be increasing the number of houses and families that will be living there, and most importantly, sharing our knowledge of the importance of the fruit bats in the region, which historically had been seen as a bit of a pest and fruit thieves. But actually, one wonderful thing that they do is as they're eating that fruit, they actually can fly incredible distances, and as they're pooping, they're helping reforest a huge area. So they have an incredibly positive impact to the environment. Another thing that we're going to be sharing our knowledge of is the negative impact of mining. And so throughout the game, we want to make sure that we create a balanced ecosystem between trees, fruits, bats, and all the different animals, all of which are going to give us points in different ways. And obviously, whoever has the most points by the end of the game will be the winner.
At the core of this game is worker placement, and across each of the 7 rounds of the game, all players will be placing 3 workers into the different worker placement spots. Now, one of the key things you're going to want to do is either for free collect terrain or at a cost collect locations in order to add them to your community area to be able to give you more storage spaces for animals, trees, fruit, bats, and eventually a thriving community of families. The first thing that's really interesting about this game is that you have this personal supply of resources, and these are going to be taken from your resource board when you collect them and placed back when you spend them. And this is a finite number of resources that you have available to you, and nobody else can touch these resources in the game. And the way you're going to be taking resources to place them out into the supply areas that you've created by these tiles is to, 1, go out on these worker placement spots to collect these things. For example, I could take these 2 beasts and place them in these 2 beast locations that I've created. Or interestingly, there's a resource generation phase in this game where if you've revealed icons that are underneath these different elements on your board, you're going to be generating those resources to further add to the things that you have stored on your terrains and locations. But what makes this difficult is that there are also ways that you need to spend the things that you're storing. Number 1, sometimes you need to spend the trees you've been storing and put them back on your supply board in order to clear land thematically to create a new location. And doing so, you're putting the trees back and therefore reducing the amount of fruit that you're going to be producing in that generation phase. The second thing is the more people, the more feeding.
Yeah.
And in classic Uwe style, in this game, you are going to have to remove fruit or remove animals in order to feed your growing population of people, which is a tension because you do want to continue building out your population, because the more families you have, the more gold you're going to be generating each round, and gold is going to help you buy things and get things done. And at the end of the game, gold is also worth victory points. There's a further complication that some families that live in your community are not going to know about the benefit of fruit bats, and you are there to teach them about the benefit of fruit bats. And in order to do so, you are going to have to take an action that turns the family over to show that they are now encouraging of the fruit bat, and actually they create a place for a safe haven where a bat can be stored because they're taking care of that bat when it's in the village. However, if the family don't know about the benefits of the fruit bat and they don't when you first collect them, well then at the end of the round they're going to go mining, which is represented by this bag of tokens, and you're going to have to pull out a pollution token that sometimes can have a piece of gold or 2 gold on the back of it, but in most cases it doesn't, and in any case they always have to be placed on your storage area as pollution, which means that you can't store anything else in that space. And the final thing to talk about is the all-important bat action that is optional at the end of every turn. So after you've placed a meeple, if you have 3 bats stored on your location tiles or terrain tiles, you're able to place them onto this side tile, send off a piece of fruit representing the piece of fruit that they're taking with them, and that generates a tree which you're able to then add to your community. At the end of the game, you're going to tally up your victory points, which will be the gold that you have left over at the end of the game, the victory points that are printed on the tiles that you've collected to build out your community, as well as the victory points for each of your depleted resources that are shown printed on the board, and for the population of bats that you've been able to cultivate as part of your ecosystem. Speaking of the ecosystem, as we move into our review of this game, that is something that is really well done. It's beautifully depicted in the way that the theme and the mechanics come together to make you feel like you're part of this regenerative process.
Yeah, it very much starts from that seed of it's all about this sort of the bat movement and the bat interaction with the fruit, and then how all of that then leads into that regeneration of other trees. And I feel like it's been so well interwoven that it all makes very perfect sense.
It really does. At first I felt as though everything was a bit procedural in the game. There's a lot of moving things around. But when you actually start to unpick the layers of that and how thematically intertwined it is with the mechanics, it's super interesting, because the way that this board is set up is that as you are removing different resources, you are uncovering the ability to collect other types of resources that are always thematically linked. So the more fruit that I have down here in my community, the more the bats are going to come to my community. So that makes perfect sense.
The more trees that are out, then the more fruit you're going to be producing, which in
Exactly.
turn kind of helps the bats, come to the yard, so to speak.
Another great thematic element is that feeding element, because as you add these families to your community, they are unveiling greater feeding needs, as you would expect, more mouths to feed. But what's interesting is as you move the goats into your community, you are going to be revealing a larger number that gets subtracted from your food needs.
They're permanent food, essentially, because they're providing you milk. So it's,
Yeah, but they're not permanent, because if you start having to kill them off for food, they go back onto your board, and then that number gets lower again. So there's this real push-pull dynamic of having the supply readily available to you, having your supply in your community, and the interactions that creates in terms of the resource generation. That is really nice.
Also creates a really interesting sort of choice, because all of the, when you're needing to sort of feed your people, you have all these different values. So for example, the goats are incredibly valuable to have out on your board because they give you that permanent food. But they also, if you were to get rid of them, they're the equivalent of 3 food, as opposed to, wild animals are 2. If you had a lot of spare fruit, you could use gold. And there's bats that can only really be used if you have families that haven't had the knowledge of, we need to protect these bats, sort of thing. So you do have a lot of different interesting choices at that point where you're like, I'm short on food. What will I use and what will make the most sense? But also not compromise my board too much, because I might need that, for the other resource generation.
And not just resource generation, but at the end of every round, each of the 7 rounds, there's going to be a different breeding objective that is shown to you at the beginning of the round, because each round we move one of these over and a new breeding objective is revealed. And what it means is that if you have a minimum of 2 families in this example, you're going to generate a new family or be able to move it from your board, from your supply board onto your community. If you have 1 bat, you're going to get another bat. And if you have 1 beast, you're going to be able to get another wild beast. And so at the start of every round, you're paying a lot of attention to that, because that's generating more resources for your community at no cost. And so that's where the competition comes from, taking the worker placement spots that are going to allow you to add to your community in those ways.
I have to just say, while we're on this, how clever and simple and elegant this process is of just, 1, it becomes your round tracker, because obviously every round you're going to be moving that forward. 2, it's also revealing an action underneath. So every round, and these tiles, you can kind of shuffle them, so the combination of actions is going to be different. But each round, that is going to be revealing another action. And then also it's determining whatever, breeding is going to happen. So it's like there's so many different things.
There is, because as they move left as well, you're also creating a new worker placement spot that didn't exist in the round before. And so there's this ever-changing combination of resources that are available.
And another sneaky thing is also showing you, when you're playing the solo game, which color, which we'll talk about later, which color is going to be getting placed. So it's just like, I love the efficiency that's been jam-packed into this one seemingly simple, a mechanic.
And that's the next point that I want to talk about in this review is the accessibility, because we have played a lot of Uwe Rosenberg games. He's one of our favorite designers. And in this game, like no other, it's really simple.
Yeah.
It's simple to teach. It's easy for people to understand, but it does have that, the more you play it, the better at it you become, and you understand how everything interacts with each other a little bit more. And I really think that Uwe in this game has practiced a lot of restraint, like a less is more kind of approach.
Yeah. I think, I agree. It's like, it's very, and that's why I keep saying the word elegant in terms of like the game design. It doesn't have a million bells and whistles, and I mean, remember this other thing and remember this other thing. But there's, there's not a million cards to read, which is another thing that we kind of tend to struggle with. But there's just so much crunchiness, even in subsequent games, in terms of like the core puzzle and the different ways of trying to get to or crack that core puzzle, that I'm very, very impressed. Very satisfying experience from that point.
Now, when you're seeing this game for the first time, you might be thinking about the components. I quite like these chunky meatballs.
I really like them, yeah. They're actually really satisfying because you only get 3. You only get 3 actions, every round. And so having them be so big, it's like it really makes you feel the weight of each one of those, the very, very limited actions that you have. I enjoy that, yeah.
When I first saw this board, I thought, well, why isn't that double layered? It would be ideal if everything's slot in, because it does take a little bit of setup time to place everything there. And of course, there's always the risk of bumping it and things falling out of position. But after playing the game many, many times, this is actually very functional, because you're going to be removing things and placing them back on so many times that if it was double layered, it probably would create a little bit of downtime.
Yeah, finding the right way to fit them would be a bit of a nightmare. So I think and I actually didn't find I think because of the friction between the cardboard on cardboard, even it's not that bad. Like things didn't fly off.
It was never catastrophic.
No. And the other thing that I'll say about this, it was really good to see that there's some strong attempts at the sustainability of the components. Obviously, everything's sort of cardboard, sustainably sourced wood, but also the packaging of it. So a lot of it, so like for example, the cards came in that sort of paper wrapping instead of just using shrink wrap for everything.
And the key message of this game is really about sustainability. And so it's nice that Lookout Games are trying to also do things about the board game being sustainable itself, to feed back into that same message, which is the strong message that you get when you finish playing this game.
Yeah.
Now, if you've seen the title of the video, you'll see that there are 2 caveats to our very positive experience of this game. But the first one requires a bit of a precursor, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that we often talk about cultural diversity, representation, inclusion in games. And we really want to just talk to you openly, transparently about where this is coming from. I suppose the first thing to say is that we are not experts in any of the topics that are represented in board games. We don't claim to be, and we're actually not even that much into history. And the things that have kind of been a problem for us along the way have really been due to lived experiences. So in Maggie's case, definitely colonization in South America has always been an issue.
Yeah, it's something that it's impacted from I grew up seeing the effects or living with what is that like in that setting.
And for me, definitely the representation of Asian people and culture has always been something that I'm probably more in tune with than other people. And also collectively, definitely those, heteronormative elements of games that make us feel a little bit othered when we play games. That is something that is top of mind because of our emotional response to that topic. When it comes to other topics, what's really interesting is that people often send us a message that is along the lines of, how can you have a problem with a game like Viticulture World or Maracaibo, but not X game that is also problematic in these other ways? And that is a great point, and exactly the point that we're often trying to make, that it is very easy in gaming to be immersed in an event, in a culture, or a different period of time, and to walk out with a different view of what you've experienced. And
not know, essentially not understand or not know the impact or the context of something, because well, one, it's either a personal blind spot because you haven't really experienced that, or but then also there's nothing to signal it in your experience of the game. So the world hasn't been created in such a way, or you haven't sort of been given any pointers to signify that things are actually not really the way that they're being depicted, or the impression that you might be getting by playing the game.
Because at best maybe it's ill-informed and you have a gappy knowledge of what that event was or that culture is like, but at worst it leaves you with a really incorrect view,
inaccurate experience or inaccurate sort of understanding of
so it's just
culture or situation
wrong. And as someone who really loves learning about different things through board games, because I was terrible at history as a kid.
Same.
I learn about so many topics and I want to understand fact from fiction. I want to walk away with a more accurate view and to make sure that there's no harm being done as well. And so while we are on the journey to educate ourselves better, publishers and designers certainly have a role in that as well, because it's not always the case, and we completely understand that you can't accurately represent all elements of a setting in a game, and it's not always going to mesh with the mechanics, and that's fine, but have that in the rule book. Explain to, you had to make some changes to some things because of the gameplay and what those things were, so that I understand that that is not how this thing looks in real life. That's and also we just encourage the use of course cultural consultants and people from the region and using artwork from the region, etc. And so that is what is going to lead into our first caveat of the game. So let's talk about the cultural representation in Atiwa and the treatment of the theme and the setting and the region.
So there's even a full booklet inside the game with, obviously, Uwe is incredibly passionate about the region. There's even a mention of the article, the initial article that he read that kind of brought this to his attention and sort of inspired everything.
And he's planning to make more games in like an African context and these uniquely African issues that are occurring with regards to sustainability.
And so in the booklet, there's a lot of historical context in terms of like almost like the politics or the way that, socioeconomic things are being arranged, and even a lot of the impact of the context of the mining, what's the mining situation, and all of that. And there's obviously so much research that he's done that he's now even publishing or it might have already been published, but in German only, so we don't have access to it, a non-fiction book on the topic and in the region. So the ecological sort of impact is something that that passion comes across very clearly and definitely through. I think the area that then there's the bigger kind of gap is more in terms of the representation of the people themselves.
And the problem is when you locate a game in a very specific place, so chibi, then of course the art style, it needs to represent the people and that place, and there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect between the time period in which the actual the fruit bat issue is occurring, which is actually
the real event is taking place.
Which is actually modern history, very recent.
2019, 2020, like the last couple of years.
And the way that Chibi as the place is represented in graphical form here, which is very much kind of a village with no paved roads, etc. And so there is a disconnect there that could lead to the incorrect interpretation of that region. And we wish that there was probably a bit more cultural consultation around that. It is noted in that booklet that Uwe worked with some friends from the region as well as a cultural anthropologist, but no names are given, and it would be ideal if those people were kind of highlighted
on the pay books. Like give us access, so because then these are the gateways to whole other worlds. Like these are the people that then you kind of go to learn even more and understand a lot more about the culture and the context and everything.
Which leads into an inevitable conversation about the box art, which has been quite controversial, and whether you like or hate the fruit bat design. Aside from that, there's been a lot of conversation about why, unlike other Lookout game titles, does this board board game art not show the community that it represents. There's no people on the cover or on the sides of the box. And also there was a real missed opportunity to use a local artist to bring this to life a bit more, as well as the art on the board.
Yeah.
It would have been a nice opportunity to engage with the culture that you're representing in the board game. And they did.
There was a subsequent,
mention,
PR, sort of release afterwards saying that there was an attempt to try and work with, an illustrator in the area. It didn't kind of work out for this time, but it is, it's the hope is that then obviously for subsequent games, that is a more something that is definitely looked at a lot more closely.
Yeah, because I feel like they've nailed the sustainability element, and they're clearly working towards better processes for that. There's a lot of historical context that is given in the booklet, which is what we love as well. And now it's just about how can we better represent the cultures that are depicted in our games and engage them as well as part of the design process. The second caveat in this game is around replayability. So there is a trade-off in this game of having a game that is very accessible, especially from an Uwe standard, versus a game that is infinitely replayable. And so one thing that Uwe has done in games like Hallertau or Newsford is have many interchangeable decks of cards that add a lot of variability to the game, or different degrees of variability. That is not the case here. And really, it is the same puzzle over and over.
Yeah, the core, the state of the board doesn't really change that much. So these 4 locations are always going to be the same. Yes, you have all of these different terrain tiles, and that obviously, it'll depend what game you play, what tiles you get access to. But all of these, the moving tiles, even though they're double-sided, it's the same action on both sides. So even though they're, you can shuffle them, it's still always going to be the same selection of actions. So at its core, the game will remain largely the same from subsequent plays.
And for me, I actually think that I would prefer it to be a little bit more accessible, but this is coming from us. We have hundreds of games in our collection, and I want something that is easy to grab off my shelf, easy to teach, and people can straight away start enjoying the game. I don't really care as much about that replayability angle, but if you're someone who wants a game that is just going to keep you entertained for hundreds of plays, then that's when I would caveat
there might be limitations with this. Having said that, however, as someone who has played this game many times now, and particularly even solo, like I've actually played this multiple times solo, I'm still not sick of it, because the actual core puzzle is so interesting in terms of being able to really crack it, and for example, there's even different challenges that the book suggests of try and finish the game with this combination or that combination, which means that even after all the gameplays, I don't quite feel like we've managed to fully optimize what this game has to offer.
Those challenges are not easy.
And even though you're still always kind of having the same, selection of actions, every game I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and do this differently. And so I still definitely get that sense of multiple ways of tackling this and multiple strategies, trying out different things to see how they play out, which is one of my favorite things to experience with games.
And speaking of player count, I found I did really enjoy this at 2 players. And when we were playing at 2 players, this game was taking us half an hour.
Yes.
And we're quite
very
rapid
speedy
players, but it meant that we would finish a game in half an hour, tally our scores, and then I would undoubtedly, because Maggie was beating me every time, to be like, let's play again. And to be able to play a game twice in an hour for this level of complexity and intrigue and strategy, I feel like that is doesn't happen very often. But I will say that at 2 players, it definitely feels less restrictive. So I didn't feel as tightly wound as I did when there were 3 players or 4 players in the game, because the competitiveness over the worker placement spots were more palpable, particularly in relation to achieving what I needed to achieve from a resource collection for the breeding, and also the competition over the cards when a really desirable desirable card would come out as well.
Yeah.
So it definitely felt more tense at 3 or 4 players, and that's why that's my preference. But at the same time, I love that Maggie and I could complete a game in half an hour.
I also like the way that they've done with the scaling. So there's this part of the board that is kind of detachable. And so this is, you see, this is always going to be very, very difficult. There's going to be a mess.
That is detachable.
That is detachable, or is it? So you have this for the 2-player game. Then on the other side, is the 3-player game. So you see that now there's more actions, obviously, that are available, and a new spot at the top for options there. And then there's the 4-player that has, even more actions, and then an action where there's, you can only go in one or the other. So the same player couldn't go in both of those. So I think this is a really simple and elegant way of scaling a game in multiple ways. I will talk about the solo mode. So the solo mode, this has re-implemented the same, my favorite way of playing a solo game, which I believe originated with A Feast for Odin, where you're essentially using a couple of different colors. In this game, you're actually using 3 different colors. You're using the red meeples, the yellow meeples, and the blue meeples. And then each round, you're essentially, so for example, with round 1, I'm going to be placing taking all of my actions with just the red meeples. Then round 2, those stay in place, and now I'm going with my yellow meeples. So now I've blocked myself. So I'm like, oh, okay, so now I have to work around my kind of placements that I did. And now for the 3rd round, I'm going to be using my blue meeples. And so once the blue meeples are placed, so that's already 3 rounds kind of gone, and now there's fewer and fewer places. For the 4th round, I'm just going to bring back the red meeples and then go again. So you're constantly having to plan almost like 2 rounds in advance, knowing that as soon as I take an action, that action is going to be gone for the next 2 rounds. There's no automa to facilitate. Every turn is my own turn. Every action has consequences that are going to impact on myself and my own game. And the game gets to get played out pretty much exactly in terms of trying to see your strategy come to life, pretty much exactly as you would in a multiplayer game. Not only that, you get to explore all those different strategies that you're like, oh, what about this? And I love that they've included then all the different sort of challenges. So it's like, not only are you trying to aim for this particular score, but then also try and do it. For example, there's one where like the colony provides shelter to as many fruit bats as possible. So finish with at least 40 fruit bats and at least 100 points, and all sorts of different kind of combinations of challenges. That to me, it's just, and I feel like, even though I've played this quite a number of times, there's still so much game here for me to explore and enjoy. And I love that because I can't wait. And again, because it plays so quickly, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do another one, and I'm going to try. And it's tough. It actually feels really, really tight and tricky. So absolutely enjoy this. Love this as a solo experience.
And that brings us to our ratings. And my rating for this one is definitely based a lot on the accessibility. I actually really like the idea of a game that scratches that Uwe itch, but that I can get to the table quickly and easily and not have to worry so much about which deck of cards and blah, 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 all those little elements. And for me, I give it an 8.2, which if you're playing along is my exact same score as Newsford.
So Newsford is a good one to compare it to. So for me, I really enjoyed the simplicity of this, and we've talked about the accessibility. It's much quicker to get to the table. You get that really satisfying Euro crunchiness bit, but I would say I still have a really soft spot in my heart for Newsford, and I think it's because of those cards and the campaign mode and all the different ways that then those cards, so the variety that they add. So this, even though they're kind of very, very close, this is going to be slightly lower for me. So this is going to be an 8.6, where if you give me a choice of playing Newsford or this, I will say either. I'll happily play either game. If I've got a bit more time, or I'll probably pick Newsford. And it's, again, a very similar solo mode as well. But this is just so much faster and so much quicker. So, and this is actually a great gateway, I feel, for players new to worker placement. And then something that even if you're playing with players who are new to worker placement, you as an experienced player are still going to have a great time with it.
We hope you enjoyed our review of Atiwa. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.